Hello and welcome to this special episode of /n, where we're going to be going through Git, GitHub, and some of the basics you need to know about version control to get started. So the first thing you need to know is Git is version control software, which really just helps you manage your code. What we're going to do today is walk through the basics so you can start getting comfortable using Git. So the first thing you need to do when starting Git is have a repository. So a repository is where all of your code is stored. So this could be locally on your computer, or this could be in a cloud provider such as GitHub, which is what we're going to go through today. So the easiest way to set this up is to go onto GitHub and start a repository. So let's do that. This is the Data Science for Daniel organization on GitHub. It'll look a little different if you're creating a GitHub repository for yourself, but it's exactly the same in terms of you click the green button to create a new repository. So we're just going to call our repository test today because we're just going to test. We don't need a description, and I'm going to leave it as public for now. You can keep things private, of course, if you don't want to share your code or if there's those sort of requirements, but there's your option. There's a few other things that GitHub will automatically set up for you here. So the first is a README file, which is always good to have. So README essentially is like the landing page of your repository. So when people come to GitHub, they can see what your project's all about and get that information. The second one we're also going to add is a .gitignore. So what a gitignore does is this lists all of the files that you don't want Git to track. So this is really, really useful when files are automatically generated through the programming language you're doing, or maybe you've got big data files or things that you don't want Git to track and you don't want to have that version control applied. So you can just list those files, those directories, anything in here, and Git will essentially ignore them. Because this is a test repo, it doesn't really matter about the template, but I think I'll probably use Python as a good example, and I'll show you that when we generate it. The third one here, you can choose a license. So if we click on the license here, you can see there's a whole bunch of different types of licenses. So this is really, really useful for open source. We're not going to use licenses today, so I'm just going to click that. So this is all good. We set main as our default branch, which is good, and we can go create repository, and that will create the repository on GitHub. Here we go. What I'm looking here is the README, and it gives it the name of the repository by default. If we go into the gitignore here as well, we can see it's preloaded with all of the Python packages that you don't need to track from Git. You can see that all here, all right, like your virtual environment stuff and things like that. So this is a really good place to get started if you're not sure about what you want to track or not, depending on what sort of project you're looking at. The other thing to know about Git and GitHub is everything works on branches, right? So we're on the main branch here, as you can see in the top left. And if we click here, there are no other branches. What you do is you create a branch for the feature you're working on. Once that feature is finished, it gets merged back into the main branch, right? So your main branch is normally your source code. And what you do is you do work on other branches. So if something does happen, you can roll back those changes and not affect your main branch. We'll explore this a little bit more when we walk through it. So what we want to do now is we want to take this repository, which is on GitHub, and put it on our local machine. So to do that, we're going to use a command called git clone. To do this, we need to have Git running on our local machine. So let's check that out. To check if you've got Git, you can type git version and see. And so I've got Git version 2.33.1, which is completely fine. If you don't have Git, just Google Git and download it, and it should happen here. So now we've got Git installed, and I'm sure you've gone and done that. We need to bring the repository in. So what we do is we click on this green button and copy the link here, and we go git clone, and we paste that repository. So what this does is it clones the repository that's on GitHub onto our local machine. So if we go into that folder and have a look what's there, we can see we've got the README file, which is exactly what we said. We've got the gitignore as well, and we've got a .git directory, which just stores the differences between all the files that changes, which is what Git is doing. So let's get into some of the other Git commands. I'm going to do this in VSCode because I'm most comfortable there. And you can watch the first video about the Python setup to learn more about VSCode. So to do this, we just open VSCode here, and this opens exactly where we are. We can close this get started, and here we go. So let's open up a terminal within VSCode. And the first thing we look at here is down the bottom left of VSCode, it tells us which branch we're on. So we're on the main branch, which is where we want to be. You can also type git branch, and it will tell you exactly where you are. So here we're on the main branch. Another command that I like is git branch va. So if we type this, it actually shows you the main branch, the branch you're on locally, which is main, but it also shows you any remote branches. So there's two different main branches. There's one on my computer and there's one on GitHub. And we want to try and keep these in sync as much as possible. The good thing about the VA command is it shows you which is the latest commit. We can see both the main on my computer and the main on GitHub. Both are at the initial commit. The head is essentially where is the latest changes. And we can see here it's at origin main, which is this bottom one here, which is where we're on GitHub. Let's go in and make some changes and see how to actually use Git. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Python file called test.py. And there we go. Here's our Python file. Now I like VS Code for this because it's got Git inbuilt. So you can see here, it's green and it says it's untracked. That's what it means. It means something that Git hasn't seen before has happened. It's an untracked file. What we can also do is improve the Git capabilities within VS Code. So we can go to extensions here and we can look for Git lens. So here's Git lens. I've already installed it, and essentially it makes Git supercharged. And to do so, we go down here and we go sign into GitHub using Git lens. Here we authorize VSCode access my GitHub, and we allow that. Cool. So now that's all synced in. So now we can go over to the test and let's just write a function. So def my func, and we're just going to return 1, the simplest function in existence. I'll save that. And now what we want to do is we want to look at our changes. So to do this on Git, we'd use git status. So here we go, git status, and there's a whole bunch of information here. The first thing is we're on branch main. That's where we expect to be. We're up to date with branch main. We've got untracked files. This means Git hasn't seen this file before. And it actually tells you, use git add to include what we committed. And there's nothing added to commit, all right? Because we haven't added it. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add this file. So Git has a sort of a 2-stage process. First you add files, and then you commit those changes. So to add files, we just go git add, and I write a dot here, which means add everything. You can also go individual files if you want. So if we do this, this is now added. And you can see here, it changed up here to be an A. So if we rerun git status, this is what it says. It's now changes to be committed. There's a new file, test.py. And you can use git restore -- stage and the file name to unstage those changes if you don't want to. But we don't want to do that in this case. What we want to do is we want to commit the changes. To do that, we use git commit. And then we do --m to have a message, and the message in our commit go, this is a test. And here we go, it's happened. So now if we go git status, there's nothing there. It says your branch is ahead of origin main by 1 commit. Could we just commit it? So now what we want to do is we want to push those changes from my local machine to GitHub. And you would notice up here that this test.py has changed back to white, saying that there's no changes to this file. Let's push that into GitHub. To do that, we use git push origin because that's where the repository is and the branch is main. So we push this, it pushes it all out, and here you can see it's updated the main branch. If we go back to GitHub here and we refresh our GitHub, we can see here now there is test.py. This is a test, it's a message, it's how long ago, and our repository's now got 2 commits. We've just pushed our first change and it's good to go. We can also check that here with git status. There we go. Our working tree is clean and all of our changes have happened. If we use git branch VA again, we can also see the local main and the remote main are both at this is a test commit. The other thing I talked about was branches. Branches are really, really important because if I made a change to test.py, I probably don't want to push it directly onto the main branch as I just did. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a branch. When you're using branches, you check out a branch to say that you're on that branch. So you can create a branch and then check it out, or you can check out and create it in the same step, which is much easier than what I like to use. So to do that, we use git checkout -b to create a new branch, and we will call this branch dev. And here you see switch to new branch dev, and there's a dev in the bottom left. And if we go git branch va, we'll see now we've got the dev one, but there is no dev branch on GitHub because it doesn't know about this dev branch yet. And I could even just leave this locally if I really wanted to. Let's make a change. Let's say we're going to return 2 now. So if I save my file, here you can see test.py now is orange with this M, which means it's been modified. Okay, so it means a file that Git is tracking has been modified and the changes haven't been committed. Again, here we can go git status and we can essentially see here, I've modified. So let's go through the exact same process. So first we add the files and then we commit the files. This is new, cool, and that's worked. What we want to do now is we want to do the same thing. We want to push these to GitHub. So here we go, git push origin, but now we're pushing dev. We're not pushing the main branch. So this will push both those changes and it will push the dev branch as well. And we can have a look at that here. Now there's the dev branch up here on GitHub. So now we've got 2 branches, okay, that are 2 different stages. We want to put them at the same spot. So to do this, we raise a pull request. To do that, go into GitHub, and sometimes there's a nice little box here. Sometimes you go up here into pull requests and you go new pull request. And what we want to do is we want to merge into main because that's where the changes are going, and we want them to come from dev. So to do this, we do this here, and you can see here, there's 1 commit, 1 file change, and 1 contributor. This is the commit, this is a new test, this is the commit number, and you can see here the change. This line is removed and this line was added. So to do this, we go create pull request, and then I will just call this PR1. I can leave a comment, but for this, there's no real point. And there's a whole bunch of other options as you get more comfortable with Git. And you can see here, this is exactly what we just looked at before. So let's create the pull request. So now the pull request is there. We're going to merge 1 commit into main from dev. There's a nice green button that says we can merge the pull request. So what this does is it takes all the changes that we're proposing and just pushes those changes into the main branch. So let's confirm the merge. Success. You can delete the branch here if you want. Doesn't really matter for now. I'm just going to leave it there. So if we go back to the code and we look at the main branch and we go into the test.py file, we see it's got return to, which is what we expect. So let's go back here. And the thing that we do here is that when there's been a change in GitHub on the remote, what we need to do is we need to fetch those changes. So if we write git fetch, this goes and pulls all of those changes down. So now we can see those changes locally. So if we go git branch VA, we can see here that the last thing to happen on the main branch on GitHub was we merged the pull request in, and the main branch locally is this is a test, and it's really nice. It tells you where you are. So our local main is 2 commits behind our remote main. So let's get that up to date. The first thing we do is we git checkout main. So to switch onto the main branch, and it says here, your branch is behind by 2 commits. So what we do is we pull those changes down into our local branch. To do that, we go git pull origin main. There we go. And you can see what's happened. And because there were no conflicts, it just fast forwarded and everything's perfect. So now we can go and have a look and see now both of them are at this same stage. Now, what I like to do as well is I like to keep my development branches up to the same point of main, right? Because it has all those pull request history in it then. So let's do the same thing for our dev branch. So we go git checkout dev. And then because nothing's changed, we can just merge. So we can git merge main here. And this merges the changes that happen in main into my dev branch. So here we can have a look at our branches. See now our local main and our local dev are both at the exact same spot. So what we want to do with our local dev now is have those changes reflected in GitHub. And we know how to do that. Git push origin dev. There we go. Pushes the changes. And now if we have a look, both our 2 local and our 2 remote branches are all at the exact same stage. The other thing that you need to do when you get set up is to set up your Git profile. So to do this, we go git config global user.name, and then you put your username. So I've already done it. So you can see here, I've got my username, and the other one is user.email, and you put your email, right? And you put it in quotes. So in here, so my email at whatever, that's where you do it. So you need to make sure that both of those are set up. You need to make both of those set up as your Git account, and they should match what's on your GitHub account. So make sure you use the same thing to use on GitHub. The other thing that we didn't talk about was Git lens. So Git lens has been set up, and you can see here, it says you 7 hours ago, this is a test. So that was who did the commit long ago, because I forgot to add this bit. So that's why it's been recorded later, and it's 7 hours ago, and the commit message, and you can see all of the details. This is the commit ID and all this sort of stuff. So this is where Git lens makes things really, really easy. It shows you what's going on, and make sure you do your config stuff as well. On GitHub, you can also switch between the different branches. So here we're on the main branch, but we can also here switch to the dev branch, and it will show all the changes that are on the dev branch. But now this branch is up to date with main. So all good. GitHub has a lot of really useful features as well. You can use issues to raise issues that people can work on. There are actions for some automation. You can group your issues together into projects and a bunch of other stuff as well. So if you're going to use GitHub, if you're going to work on open source software or any sort of collaborative project, I definitely recommend checking out some of these other features. Some of the other Data Science with Daniel repositories already have all this set up. So I would recommend going and checking those out to see how to get started at least. The other thing here is you can put your description about what your repository is. If you have packages or releases that you're working on that you can actually publish here, and it actually automatically recognizes which languages are written in your repository, which is nice to keep track. There are other Git features that I haven't covered today, things like merge conflicts and Git diff and rebasing and a lot of more complex stuff. But for now, this is enough to get started, starting using Git. I recommend to use Git in any software project that you're working on, even if it's just yourself, because being able to roll back changes if you have an issue is really, really important. If you do want to learn more, I recommend going here to the Git documentation here and looking at this reference. And you can see here, there are so many different Git commands that you can use. We've only covered a few. If you really want to get good at using Git, I recommend looking at some of these other more complex ones depending on what you're trying to do. So probably the one that I haven't covered here that you can use is Git init. What Git init does is you can create a Git repository locally without having to use GitHub. Now, I like to use GitHub to set up the gitignore with a template and the README already there for me, but you can always use Git init to create things locally, especially if you're never going to push it to a remote repository. There are other Git commands here, and I recommend to check them out. That's going to be it for today around the Git basics and how to get started with Git and GitHub. Hope you learn a lot, and hopefully you can start using version control in your own projects.